Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Christ Over Fear. I am your host, Chad Jenkins, and we are on with episode 16, May 18th, 2022. Have to give one shout out very quickly, but it does have to be first and foremost. A blessing in my life 12 years ago today, the birth of Bryce Jenkins, my son. So it's his birthday today. That man knows how to celebrate his birthday. He was rocking and rolling with It Feels Good. That was the first song he played this morning as he came into Emily and I's bedroom. So if he was feeling good, and then he ended it with a little 50 Cent "It's Your Birthday" for our outing before he went to school to get on the school bus. So shout out to him. Hey, all right, so I always kind of start off with, something, and it's typically my Bible study in the morning, the morning, and it's typically the morning of, and I'll go with that. This morning, John Eldridge's daily devotional is talking about Solomon and the wisdom of Solomon, and then it got me into First Kings. I was reading this morning, and just when Solomon is given basically everything from his father David, the kingdom, and taking over the kingdom, and he's building his palace, and he's building the temple to the Lord, and he has a vision with the Lord in his sleep. And what he does during that time frame, he thinks it's like why he's awake, and then he recognizes it was a dream. But in that, when he had his one opportunity, his one moment with God, he asked for discernment and for wisdom from God to rule his people with justice and with the perfect balance of truth and grace. And the Lord was so kind of impressed with that he blessed him with that. And then he says, I'm also going to bless you with wealth. I'm going to bless you with, wisdom and all of those things. But that was what he asked for, was discernment to know what's right and what's wrong, even in the gray areas of our life. And it stuck out to me. And that was the whole purpose of the devotional, was that we need to seek wisdom. And the way we can do that is through the edification of the Holy Spirit and through basically being in the Word, being in the Bible. It renews us, because, man, if I get off track, and I do, and I'm not in that, I don't have that grounding, I don't have that anchor in the waves of life. I can get tossed by the waves and start to get off kilter, whether it's, being a parent, being a good husband, being a decent person. All of those things, my interactions with others. So that's kind of the tidbit. All right, episode 16, my man, Gabriel Huft, which I have to ask him. He's going by Gabriel now, so I'll have to ask him, but he was, always known as Gabe Huft back in the day. So Gabe and I were in 2nd Ranger Battalion, Bravo Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion. He went on and was the sustainment platoon sergeant. He was the battalion S4 NCO as well in 2nd Ranger Battalion. I think he did a stint down in Fort Benning, Georgia for the 75th Ranger Regiment. So we'll have to ask him that. But Gabe Huft, if anyone knows in the military, and this is obviously geared toward combat veterans and the military community, the platoon sergeant or the supply sergeant rules the roost. They control everything in a company. Like, if you want any type of decent equipment, any type of decent care, the supply sergeant is he's the gatekeeper of it. And Gabe was just that, probably one of the most seasoned legends of the 75th Ranger Regiment, specifically at Fort Lewis at 2nd Ranger Battalion. So anybody in 2nd Ranger Battalion knows Gabe Huft in the last 25 years that's been around. So excited to have him on, excited to hear about his journey, because I'll let him tell the story, but Gabe was not during that time frame, at least to my knowledge. We'll ask him his journey with Christ and how that has just blossomed and grown, and where it's taken him, and how he leads it with on his shoulders today. So I'm really excited to hear about that. So I keep on talking about it, I might as well give him a crack at being introduced. So there he is, people, the man, the myth, the legend, Gabe Huft, my man. What's up?
How's it going, Chad? Just Gotta say, I was a little bit nervous about coming on today, but yeah, the butterfly's kind of settling down right now. So
Well, hey, and that's good, man. That's and I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing, but dude, it's you and me. And what's really awesome, I think, and it's nerve-wracking, especially when we share our story in Christ, but that like, dude, we're here, man. We're here. I would have never thought in 2007, leaving 2nd Ranger Battalion, that you and I in 2022 would be sitting here on a Christ over fear show, and you're at, Calvary Chapel Olympia, working there, serving there. So I just think it's pretty cool to see this journey, and I can't wait to hear about this journey, actually.
yeah, it's definitely been fun. I could tell you that it wasn't evident probably back then because I wasn't really walking with him. I mean, I believed in God, but it was kind of like, yeah, there's somebody there, but there was nothing really. There was no solid foundation back then. So
Well, which is okay, man. That's his timing, not ours, and how that works. And I remember one time I was talking to my sister-in-law. Actually, I was like, oh, like when my faith became stronger and stronger, years later after the military, and I was telling her, I was like, and it was more, a little bit short-sighted, and she called me out on it, but not in a way that was like harsh. But I was like, oh, I could have had such a better and more impact if I would have been like this then. I would have had such a greater impact on guys, and they would have seen that. And she just like, it was very nonchalant, but I love the way she says, she's like, no, she's like, you are this way now, and if guys see that and they remember what you were like then, and then they see what he's done to you now, like, you don't need to worry about going retroactively back in time. Like, be who you are now, and they'll see that. And like, that's the transformation. That's what they see, not that like, oh, it was a missed opportunity. So I thought that was a cool bit of advice.
definitely. I think that everything is kind of like geared me up towards walking with Christ now because
Yeah.
I have a lot of back baggage. Well, I call it baggage, but they're just learning experiences that God has definitely put my way to help me learn more about myself and about how to serve Him better. So
Yeah, sweet. And also, it's it is what it is. When you were in that time frame, I remember you and I. So I was the platoon, or I'm sorry, the company executive officer. You were the supply sergeant for BCO 275, and you and I, obviously, it was like right hand, left hand. I mean, we worked dynamically. Integral part of you and I functioning together. But I remember that time frame, and that's when you and I finally got back into being connected. Like, I thought you were Jewish at that time. Remember? Like, and am I crazy? Did you think that there was a little bit of Jewish heritage at that time frame, or what was the deal back in the day?
uh, I thought that there was Jewish heritage, but there was also kind of like people threw that at me, like, "Hey, what are you Jewish?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So, and I just rolled
So
with
it
it.
All right, all right. So it was, but there was a little bit of thought that you had some Jewish heritage in your background, DNA, all of that stuff. Which maybe, have you confirmed or denied that at all?
I have
Like
not.
through 123 DNA or 123 me or whatever it is.
I have not, but one of my parents took a DNA test, and it kind of like conclusively ended that. so,
Okay. All right. All
so
right. There we have it. Well, I didn't know if you were practicing, Jewish,
no,
and then came into Christianity, or how that works. So that's why I wanted to ask you on that. And then the second thing, because obviously Christ over fear, we're very heavy on talking about, Christ and the journey that God has brought us on. But it's all encompassing. It encompasses, our, leadership, personal lives, professional lives, all of those in between. One thing on the leadership aspect that I don't think I've told you, Gabe, and I actually had it in the intro. I wanted to say it before I brought you on, but I forgot, so I'll do it now. Is what an impact you had on my leadership development when I was an XO. And it's something that actually not only impacted me then, but it actually has carried on and impacted me today still. And I still reflect on, and it was one conversation, you probably don't even remember it. Maybe it was more than one conversation. But I remember you coming in, and we'd be sitting down in my office, and you'd be like, sir, like, you're trying to do it all yourself. Like you're like trying to put too much on your plate. You're not delegating, you're not tasking out, and you're going to fail. You're going to fail if you try to do all this and you don't start being a leader and delegating. And I say the reason it sticks to me now is it's still a struggle of mine today. I've worked on it. I try to be a better task manager, to task things out, or in the private sector, more like maybe hire somebody on to help in one area rather than doing everything else to be more proficient. But that's an area of leadership development that on paper you were I guess I was a senior and on like the rank and structure, but from a leadership development, you were leading me at that point. You were and had the insight, the wisdom, I guess, as we're talking about Solomon this morning, and just the character to recognize and to give that constructive feedback. So one, thank you. And two, I'm impressed by your ability to do that, back in the day.
Well, I think it goes back to ironing, sharpening iron, because
Yeah.
I learned a lot from you during that time frame, and it was just it was a give and take. I mean, if you see something that needs improvement, I mean, you just share. And there were plenty of things that you shared with me too that I needed to work on. So
I don't remember those. Those I do not remember. I think it was reciprocal. I think it was only one way.
no, it definitely wasn't.
Well, dude, Gabe, let's get into this before we get into a Chad Gabe love fest, which I'm cool with. We could do that for a little bit, but instead of doing that, dude, tell me, all right, Portland, Oregon's where you grew up. How'd you end up getting to Ranger Regiment, and what was that journey? What, like in middle school, high school, and those fronts to get you into regiment?
Well, in high school, I didn't attend for very long because I got expelled, fighting trouble, so on and so forth. And then I went and did a GED program that they offered, and got my GED and started working. Was working. Met at that time my wife. She was not my wife back then, but met my wife back then, and I was 17, she was 14. Got her pregnant, and was working and just couldn't meet and whatnot. Ended up worked at 7-Eleven in the bad part of town, so I had one bad robbery, and I was just like, okay, this is enough. That I'm not getting paid enough to get shot at and not shoot back. So I was like, well, I'm going to go join the Army. And right as I quit my job, my dad invited me to church, and I found out about the gospel, the good news, but because I knew that there was bad news to me, but it was just a flash in the pan kind of thing. And then I joined the Army, and I still believed in God and acknowledged him, and went on. My first duty assignment was actually the 82nd Airborne Division. And from there, I really wanted to go to Ranger Battalion, was going to go, and couldn't make it, not physically or anything like that, but there's just so many roadblocks as a supply guy, trying to get there. And they were like, yeah, well, we don't have slots for you. I eventually called up to Ranger Branch. Doug Pallister was working there at the time. And and I was like, hey, I want to go. And he's like, well, I'll call you reenlistment recruiter, and I'll talk to him. Go ahead and go over there in about an hour, and you sign the paperwork. And went over there, signed the paperwork, went to RIP. And it was everything I was expecting the Army to be. I had this preconceived notion of what the Army was going to be like when I joined, and I was severely let down throughout basic training, AIT, so on and so forth. I was like, man, this is not the Army that I was expecting. The people, so on and so forth. And then when I got to RIP and just seeing the quality of like the cadre, the NCOs, and just the people in the unit, I was like, this is where I want it to be. Got to Ranger Battalion. It's like, I'm never leaving.
And was that 2nd Ranger Battalion that you first went to then?
Yeah.
And did you request that since you were from Oregon? Did you try to get to 275, or how'd that work out?
Yeah, I did request it. When I was talking to Doug Pallister, I was like, hey, is there any way I can get 2nd Ranger Battalion guaranteed? And he's like, yes. As a matter of fact, I almost got kicked out of RIP upon graduation because they wanted me to go to 1st Battalion. and,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, I talked to the Ranger liaison. He said I can go to 2nd Battalion. And Sergeant Hall, who still lives up here in this area, he's like, hey, I'll tell you what, man, you just be happy that we're letting you serve in this organization. And I was like, whoa. And I thought, I was like, man, I just passed everything and I am
Yeah.
done. He's good. And so yeah, went up to 2nd Ranger Battalion. So that was good.
All right, that's pretty sweet. And that's so. Tell me about the. So your wife and your child, what son? Did you say you had a son? Daughter. Okay, your wife and your daughter. Did they go down to? They didn't go to Benning with you, and then for 82nd with you, or anything like that, did they?
No,
they stayed at Oregon. Okay,
yeah. Which was the big part of the motivation for getting 2nd Ranger Battalion, so I could be close to them and whatnot. So yeah.
And what time frame is this, Gabe? What time frame did you enlist in the Army and then kind of make it to RIP and then get to 275?
I enlisted on the delayed entry program in July of 95. Actually went for basic training November of 95. Didn't get to RIP until April of 98.
Okay, so it was like 3 years then that you were kind of in the grind and doing all of that to then get up to 275.
Yep.
And then obviously pre 9/11, so a lot different dynamic of 75th Ranger Regiment until September 11th, 2001. What was it like as far as becoming a supply sergeant in 275, and then what your faith look like at that time frame? I know you said you acknowledge, okay, there is a God. What kind of journey did that look like for you?
Well, at that point in time, I would call myself a Christian, but I really wasn't walking the walk, so to speak. I called myself a Christian, but there was nothing that I was doing I wasn't even going to church, and it was just one of those times where I was just really comfortable. I would pray to him every once in a while, but I want to go to church. I want to read the Bible. Didn't even really basically understand the Trinity at that point in time in my life, to be perfectly honest with you, which was kind of one of the reasons why I probably kind of like didn't really, to me, the Bible didn't seem to make sense at that point in time. So, and of course that was because I was only letting somebody else read it to me, and I wasn't actually getting in there and reading myself at it. So that probably had a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I called myself a Christian, but it wasn't really anything that was walked out in my life.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm glad you say that, because I would say that was kind of very similar to like my path all the way up until later in my life, where, in the household, it was like, okay, yeah, we're Christians, but what does that mean? Well, it means that, like, I remember like one of the biggest declarations I had was that, like, on my dog tags, I was like, sure, put Protestant. Like, I didn't even know what Protestant meant, but like, yeah, you're Protestant, but to your point, that's as far as it went. I mean, there was a little bit here and there of things. And it really, I remember I would give the standard answer. I've said it on this show before too. Like, well, I'm not really a religious guy. Yeah, I'm Christian, but I'm not really a religious guy. And the only reason I said that is because I didn't have any knowledge. Which I could have taken upon myself, but I was never taught, nor did I ever just read. So therefore it was like an insecurity of mine. So the easy answer was to say, well, then I'm just not, I'm not a religious guy. And lo and behold, doing the game of life kind of empty-handed, without like the right and left sector limits, that I think is what is so important about the word, to give us our left and right sectors. So that's my rant for today. But to get back to you, can you go ahead? Can you get into it on what it looked like and how you grew in your faith, or if you didn't, and during the Ranger Regiment time frame it wasn't there, or keep on going on the path of how Christ got a hold of you?
Well, so for the very long time, I really didn't walk the walk, and it wasn't even until after I got out of the Army that I really sought him. That there were times that I remember where I would pray to him with all my heart. And he even answered some of those prayers. They like the Jessica Lynch mission, that everybody was like, hey, after tonight, nobody's going to talk about Mogadishu anymore. And, there's 15,000 bad guys waiting there for you. And you're like, I'm sitting there. I'm like worried that I'm not going to make it home. I'm never going to see my daughter go to high school or anything like that. And I'm praying to God, and I'm like, and I know I wasn't the only one, because everybody was scared. I mean, if they say that they weren't scared, they're definitely lying, because that was like one of the biggest fears. It's like, I had 12 magazines, 4 hand grenades, and an AT-4 strapped to my back as a supply guy working in the CCP. So, but I mean, luckily, when we went in there was nothing. Some goats and whatnot, and they all ran. So
Yeah.
It was an answer to the prayer, but there was nothing ever really manifesting a relationship or a true devotion to God at that point in time. And there was really, even after I got out of the Army, right after I got out of the Army, I actually had a pulmonary embolism, and it lodged in my lung. I actually lost like a fifth of my right lung. And once again, I'd pray to God. I'd be like, oh God, please. And, but there was nothing ever there. And then slowly but surely, I kept on praying to God more and more. And then I was like, God, I really need to stop doing this. I need to stop just giving you lip service and just coming to you when I want or need something. I was like, you've helped me out through so many different things, and I really need to serve you. And right after that, this is during the COVID lockdown. A friend of my wife's and a friend of mine as well, he comes over and he's like, hey, you going to church? And I was like, no, we're in lockdown. He's like, oh, here's an online church. And he gave me like a YouTube site to a church that was doing services. And I start watching that. And I was like, and then I got a job working for the state. And then, as I'm working for the state, the main supervisor was a pastor. And then one of my coworkers was a man. He's a Christian. And, I was working back there, and I'm listening to gospel music and whatnot. I'm just like sitting back there, just doing my thing. And they're all listening to like secular music and whatnot. And I'm just like, okay. And he's like, hey, you want to listen to whatever you're listening to, so we can all listen to it? I was like, man, you wouldn't like what I'm listening to. I'm listening to gospel music. And he's like, really? Like, who you listening to? Zach Williams? Pat Garrett? And I'm like, whoa. And then we started conversing, and he had a real big instrumental part in me actually starting to know what it's like to walk it out with Christ. And so we started conversing, and he invited me to church, which just happened to be Calvary Chapel of Olympia. Started going there, and at that point in time, right before I got the job with the state, I was like, God, I'm going to seek you. Just give me a way, give me a path. And then all these people started coming into my life and just like helping me give that right and left bumper, as so to speak. And I started just getting in the Word and just reading God's Word, and just the more I tried to interpret it, the more it interpreted me. And I just kept on growing and learning, and just, I mean, right now I would say I'm definitely walking with God. Of course, I'm not perfect. I'm far from it, but I stumbled, and I have my sins too still. But I definitely sin less.
You're human.
Yeah. I definitely sin a lot less, because there's things that I don't want to take God's grace for granted anymore. And I just want to live out my life and just glorify Him with anything that I do.
Man, that is awesome. Tell me, you said something just now, and I want to dive into it a little bit more. You said, the more I interpreted the Word, I recognized it was interpreting me. Can you explain that a little further? Because I think that's a powerful statement, but I want to know what that means to Gabe Huft.
Well, you start doing your Bible studies and your little devotionals, and you read it, and you make your observations, and you're just like, okay, I'm reading this, and you're like, whoa, hold on a second, and the Holy Spirit starts to work on you, and you're like,
Mhm.
this is the area of my life that I need to work on too, and it's it's odd how God's living Word is definitely good. It's gonna shape you. It's gonna shape you, and it's every time I read it, I'm like, okay, I need to work on that. I need to work on that. The for the first few months, all I was stuck in was Matthew and the Beatitudes. And if you read the Beatitudes for just what they are, it's like, oh my gosh, I am a filthy human being.
Well, I just think that's cool though, because I mean, that's what I've loved about this show is just hearing other individual stories and their walk and their growth and their faith, deepen. But I haven't heard anybody say that. And what I like about you saying that is because it's similar. Like, and it's a choice though. It's a choice when we read the word and we're in it, and then like we have an area that he's illuminating, right? He's illuminating our hearts at that point in time. Most likely, like for me, it's like a bad area of my heart that needs to be, needs to be worked on and given over to him, and not to my selfishness or what I want. And I just think that's cool. But I also think like there are times where I almost get irritated. Like that's what I want people to know. Like there are times when I read it, I'm like, gosh darn it. Like, okay, like I know what you're saying to me. I know by where I am in the scripture and what you're telling me about envy and jealousy and rage or whatever it is. Like, I know you're telling me that that's how I'm being right now. And like, I think sometimes my intellect is there. Like I understand it, but emotionally, I'm not ready to give it up, if that makes sense. Emotionally, I'm slow to catch. Intellectually, I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. But emotionally and then more like behaviorally to act out on that, I'm hard headed and it takes me some time. Have you ever gone into that mode as well, or are you more obedient in your walk than I am?
I think that none of us are that obedient. But but that's the awesome of God. That's the awesomeness of God's grace.
Yeah.
You 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 know that you need to work on it, and as long as you continue to seek Him, I think that one of the things is that you can't do it. Like if you try to do it by yourself, you're not going to be able to do it, and
Hmm.
I think that that's one of the key things that He wants with that relationship aspect with you is He wants you to come to Him and be like, hey, I can't do this, and that frustration, and it's like God, I know what you're trying to tell me, and I know that I need to change, and I know that my heart is just not right now, but please help soften it so
Yeah.
so I can get to that place that you're trying to teach me to be, because there's times where you read something and you're like, the application that it means for you and at that time, and you're just like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, and I think that's real though. That's what this whole show is about. I was going to call a podcast, Gabe. You got to keep me accountable, man. I still haven't thrown them in podcasts, so I'm getting overwhelmed in that. I need help. But on that front, I love that because it's being real. It's being real about it and not making it so perfect and like, oh no, like I just started following. It was really easy. He cut my soul and I just was obedient and in my walk and it was an easy journey. And that's not the case at all for anyone, I don't think. I want to get back to you on like so it's COVID timeframe, the lockdown when the one individual invites you to the online church. But prior to that, and you were talking about praying and doing all that stuff, like were there any life events, like life situations where you're like, man, I don't have this figured out. I don't have the answer to this. Like, where I guess retrospectively, as you were starting to look, like the critical areas in your life where you're like, man, I need you, Lord, because I don't have the answer right now. And are there any of those that you can really look upon or point out? I know you mentioned the Jessica Lynch mission. Is there anything else throughout your time in 2nd Ranger Battalion even that kind of pops out?
Nothing specifically. I say that over the time frame of, you know, I think I was there for 16 years, 15 years worth of war.
Yeah.
Um, I, it takes its toll on you. It really does. It
Mhm.
it wears you down. It's a mental beatdown. And I during my time in the military, I drew upon looking at the guys from World War II as kind of like my hey, these guys didn't get to go home. You
Yeah.
know, they stayed until the war was won. And
Hmm.
having seen the direct impacts that I know that we had, that many people don't know what we did overseas. Uh, you know, just knowing that you stop attacks back home in Iraq and Afghanistan, and people are just like, yeah, sure. And it's like, okay, well, you know, that we had an impact, but
Hmm.
it, all that just wearing on you, and just the anxiety, I guess, of all that combat time, because in the moment you just kind of like you push it off to the side, and you're just like you focus in, and you're just focusing on the mission and accomplishment and the guys to the left and the right of you. But at some point in time, you're gonna you're gonna pull off, and you're never gonna go back to that ready room. And at that point in time, you have to wrestle with all the stuff that you put off to the side. And I think
Hmm.
that all that stuff that I started wrestling with was really what broke me. Um,
Yeah.
I I couldn't sleep. Um, had super anxiety. I you know couldn't sit in a restaurant. Couldn't go to the mall because there's too many people. Just a lot of stuff like that, and just you know I was like, man, I can't do this. And I sought counseling, and I was actually going to a counselor, and it kind of helped. It gave
Hmm.
me a lot of tools.
Yeah.
But there was something that wasn't complete.
Hmm.
And I still felt a little bit of that pressure and that anxiety building. And once and I'll tell you, when I decided to commit to God and start walking with him, like, there was a lot of not just emotional baggage, but there's a lot of sins that were just there. And some of them I don't struggle with that much anymore. Some of them I still struggle with. But I tell you, the one thing is the peace of knowing that everything's going to be according to his plan, and just knowing that I trust him, and that all these
Hmm.
things that are happening are ultimately lessons to push me forward to help glorify him.
Yeah. Man. And what time frame was that, Gabe? Was that while you were still in the army, or was it after you got out when you were saying like you were having the heightened anxiety and unable to, go to crowded areas? Was that once as you said, all those things that were pushed to the side to focus on the mission at hand, they came back. Was that once you came back on deployments, or was that once you had hard retired out of the army and then the time frame kind of everything everything kind of slowed a little bit?
It was definitely after I got out of the army, because
Okay.
even when we were home, we weren't really home. Um,
Right. Yeah. With the mission, with the
yeah,
train up and all that stuff. Yeah.
because I mean, the day that you got home, you already knew, like, on the calendar when you were going
Right.
back, and
Right.
so it was still the mission at hand. And even though that you were home and you were there with your wife and my daughter, it there was still like, okay, I got to, I can breathe a little bit, but I got to look, because you know X time from now I'm going to be back over there again.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think what you're saying is huge to share that. So thank you for doing that and being open on the some of the areas, some of the I guess I'll say I don't want to say symptoms, but the side effects of all of that combat and that heightened state of alert that your body and your mind and your spirit had to stay in to survive and to go to war. But it's one, you're not alone in it either. And like my healing combat trauma group down in West Palm Beach, the group that I got plugged in when I was going through all of my therapy treatment, and it's a Christian-based, biblical-led group down there. But almost every man to a T said the exact same thing, and I guess I'm trying to say it for our kind of our GWAT generation is a lot of these guys that were in this group, they were Vietnam era. They were Vietnam guys, but what they did is then they ingratiated themselves into their work or started businesses, were truck drivers doing whatever. And they filled that kind of that heightened state of combat just with a heightened state of workload to bombard themselves just to stay occupied. I'm just going to fill myself with so much stuff and just stay occupied to keep pushing that out, like you say, until then they finally like hard retired from from their second career, if you will. And then once they were a little bit older and had that retirement and that time, and then everything hit them. I don't want to say it was to a man, but a large majority, it hit them like a ton of bricks. And it was like a charge, an explosive charge that just kept on C4, just kept on getting added to it. The time fuse got longer and longer and longer. But then once it burned and it blew, it was bigger and bigger and bigger. So the whole goal is like, okay, let's share these stories now. Let's share the Gabe Huft stories, the Chad Jenkins story, the everybody else that's been on here stories, so that somebody out there who hasn't maybe addressed that, their charge won't be as big, when all those things that were pushed aside do come back. Because God can heal anyone he wants, but I think oftentimes he allows for those things to happen to point those that have that explosion take place to him, to illuminate him. And if we can do it quicker and sooner, and there's not the collateral damage, if you will, I think the better. What do you think on that front?
I definitely think that that's ultimately, because God knows us. He knows me. He knows you better than we know ourselves. I mean,
Yeah.
he does. And he knows kind of like what's gonna trip you and what's gonna trigger you and what's gonna build you up as well. And I think that unfortunately some of most of us from that that community, that combat community, we need, unfortunately, that larger charge to point us to him. It's scary because and unfortunately, I think that some people kind of break underneath that charge, but you know,
Go into
it,
that a little bit more. Go into that a little more. What do you mean?
break underneath that charge.
Yeah.
I think that some people will unfortunately kind of like push God out of the equation because of that, and
Mm-hmm.
and just harden their heart. Um, which I don't think that that's the purpose of that charge going off when it does go off. Um, there's one particular, I'm not gonna say his name, but good friend of mine as well, who shared a lot of the same experiences that we did, and was in Bico as well at times for a time there in the season. But he his heart is very hard, and he's constantly in my prayers, just because I'm like, there's a lot of things that he continuously just tries to shove off to the side, and I think that it's digging him deeper. And
Yeah.
I think it's the charge went off, and I think instead of like filling that crater in, I think that now he's just building another charge.
Mm-hmm. Man. Here's the thing on that, Gabe, is like Thank you for saying that and sharing it, because you're right. In the charge, God oftentimes, while he doesn't build it, he doesn't build the charge, he allows for that charge to go off. He allows for everything under the sun, right? So he does allow, and there's that pivotal moment where there's two ways to go: towards him or away from him. And that's the ultimate choice. That's the ultimate freedom that he gives us, right? The free will to make that decision, which is the most vital and important decision that one person will ever make in their entire life. Not to say that decision can only be made in that time when the bomb goes off and the charge goes off, but that's the decision point. And I appreciate what you said, because here's the thing. And there's individuals that I know that are exactly the same way as what you're describing as well with your friend. And you love them regardless, right? Yes. You love them regardless. I love them regardless. And here's the rub too, for you, and probably, well, I know for me, but probably for you too, is like what you know and what I know about what this does, and piercing our hearts and softening our hearts and making us finally live the way that he has intended us to live. We want that to be shared. We want that to be felt and experienced by those individuals. Yep. But the only way, I think, maybe not the only way, but a large majority of the way, is through us just continually loving them. Continually loving, not telling them what they need to be doing and that they need to be in it, and that if they only would turn to this, then they would be healed or they would be on a new path, but just to love them. And then to do what you do, Gabe. You're on here sharing your story, sharing your testimony, like, hey, that charge went off. I had a decision. I went to him. And maybe, just maybe, the Holy Spirit will draw that individual in, and draw the individuals that you and I both are continually seeking out and wanting to turn to him, right?
Absolutely. So one of the guys at my church, he constantly says this one phrase. He's like, it's always necessary to preach the gospel, but not necessarily always to use words while doing it. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's by loving them and mm-hmm. just sacrificing for them and being there for them, and showing them the grace and being kind to them, and just still being their friend. But my interactions of how I talk to people now, since I'm actually walking with Christ, is 20 times different. Mm-hmm. I still get flustered. I still get upset at that when things don't go out the way I want them to go. But it's, I have a lot more kind things coming out of my mouth, and, just general displays of affection, of caring towards other individuals now. So.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I mean, you're right. I mean, I like what was it a pastor or a friend that said that, you're preaching the gospel constantly, maybe not with words sometimes.
Yeah, it's both a friend, and I think he's on his way to becoming a pastor.
I got you. Yeah. And I also, now there is also, I also go back to guys that I've shared this before too, that we're walking that walk, and we're open in that walk. The way that I was kind of, I guess, attracted to the way they lived their lives. You know what? They were also, they loved me, they cared for me, but they also stayed true to the right and left limits of the word, and they didn't let that get trampled on. And I guess what I'm saying is I have to be careful at times, because I don't want to ever go to a situation where I'm just like, oh, I'm just, I'm hanging out with everybody. I'm just loving on them and just loving, and just, this is me being, following Christ. Well, no, because if you look everywhere Christ went, where he was going, he was still about sharing his message. He was still about sharing himself and the truth, and not partaking in the nonsense. Cause a lot of times, hey, it might be nonsense that people are partaking in, not partaking in and be like, well, I'm just going to be one of the boys and hang out. And I know that's not what you're saying, but more for the greater audience, I guess, for any individuals out here who think like, hey, maybe that's the way I do it, is go in and hang out and, raise hell. And people think, oh, they'll eventually come around and know that I love Christ. I don't think that's the way to do it, but there's that fine line of loving on the individual, but then also staying true to the obedience of the word.
Definitely. And there's a lot of who I was and desires that just don't really interest me that much anymore. Some of the things that I used to do that were just blatantly, just like I don't know, going to a bar and just hanging out, that sort of thing. I'm not saying that I'm above it and I don't condemn those that do it, but it just
Right.
doesn't call to me anymore. I don't feel like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna go hang out at Joe's Tavern tomorrow for like 5 hours and just shoot some pool. It just I that desire to do those type of things, they don't really they don't appeal to me that much.
Mm-hmm.
I still want to interact with those guys. I still want to, I'll go out for like coffee or just call them up out of the blue and be like, hey man, how you doing? How's your wife? How's your kids? The things that really matter to them. And
Right.
instead of just like the surface, like, hey, how's the weather over there, man?
Dude, which is notoriously such a, surface conversation. How do you do that? How do you navigate getting deeper into, I mean, especially, um, Second Ranger Battalion, the not that everybody fits a mold, but it's very difficult sometimes to get under the surface and to the hearts of the matter. How have you done that? What's your approach on that?
Well, first and foremost, you just got to listen, and then you got to ask questions. And if you're asking like truly heartfelt questions about them and about what's going on in their life, you're going to get answers, because the shared experience of all that combat time, they kind of trust you already,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's not like, and you're not really asking these questions because you're trying to gain like some sort of advantage. You're asking these questions because you generally you love them, and you care about
Right.
them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Right.
and you're like, and you want to listen, and so you just start asking these questions like, so what's going on with your wife, she's busy with work. You could stop that question right there, or you can be like,
Mhm.
so what's got her so busy, man? I mean, what's going on? It sounds like you're a little bit stressed out about that.
Yeah.
And now, they'll start pouring out about it. They'll be like, well, she got promoted and she's got a bunch of new positions. She's super stressed out. When she comes home, she's cranky, and I've been kind of dealing with that. And then it opens up all this other, behind the scenes sort of things that are going on in that person's life that you can just kind of be like, it gives you a little bit of insight uh, to what's going on, instead of just like, hey, how's your wife? Oh, she's super busy, man. Oh, that's good. Then just move on
Yeah.
to the next subject. It's like, well, why is she super busy? What's going on there? What's causing that business? Is it stressing you out at home? Is she bringing home her work like we used to do? Just sit
Right.
on the couch and just super stressed out, just like,
Don't talk to me.
yeah, I'm just gonna watch this TV and drink this beer. Leave me alone.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's about, and I think, there's the camaraderie of the experiences that have been gone through together that help bridge that. But I also think it's just, I know for me, and I work on it. I probably was a little bit better a couple years ago, and I need to get better now of being more real and vulnerable in the moment with trusted confidants, to because that is, I mean, it's actually therapeutic for us. We don't, it's not like you have to go to a psychologist or a therapist in order to have therapeutic experiences. I mean, it's actually sitting down with a dude that you trust with your life, and being open. And I think what happens then too is, both individuals benefit from it, because both individuals actually are going to gain. One will see what it means to be vulnerable, and the other one will feel better about actually being real with whatever's bothering them at that point in time. And I think we as men, I think women do it 10 times better than us. It's probably biological, but we can't use that as an excuse either. We need to be better at finding confidants and being more raw, transparent, and real with one another in order to better ourselves, for only ourselves, but then for our wives, for our kids, for our families, for just our better way of life when we interact with, others.
Yeah, and I think the number one thing there that you brought up is your home, your wife and your kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that taking care of the ones that are closest to us, sometimes, and because for so long, Chad, I made my family second, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel completely guilty about that. And I'm not trying to take away from the 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 general audience for the YouTube channel, but it the family, the guys, talking to the guys, they help, but that helps when I walk through that door. Because I mean, when you think about it, I got a total of 5 years and 3 months deployed, and when you split that up into the training time and all the exercises that go into that and all the professional development schools and whatnot, you could probably account for at least half of that
Mm-hmm.
being gone just in training during that time. So, there's probably close to 8 years of my life that I wasn't even there. And then when I came home, I definitely wasn't there.
Yeah.
Um, and that's one of the things that, I'm trying to correct, and I'm trying to get a better azimuth on now is loving my family. As much as I dedicated everything towards the job and the mission, and yeah, I did at that time love my wife, but I didn't display it in such a way that was purposeful, and that probably had a huge impact on the development of my daughter. And it's there's some hard interactions now because of that. um and I'm sharing for everybody to hear that, but because somebody else might be doing that too. And I'll tell you what, um having those interactions to strengthen yourself and get that stuff off your chest with other men, but then taking that back into your house and applying that to your family is so important, because there's a reason why the first ministry God created was the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty important.
Yeah. Well, and everything you just said, Gabe, I mean, it's also, you know, um, it's what the enemy tries to come for first is the family, right? Satan's his number one goal is to seek to destroy and deceive and to tear apart the family. Because what you just said, the number one ministry is the family and the household. And running it in such a way that glorifies him. However, there's a lot of things on that too. Like, yeah, the years the locust ate, but God can renew those and refine those and give those hope, because what you're doing, you're applying it. And your application is not a huge word I like, but living it. You're living it out. You're living it out now, and what he can do with that, and how he can bless you and your family is endless at that moment. And that you're actually willing to have those conversations and have those challenging dialogues. And whether it's uncomfortable, yes, it probably is. It's going to be confrontational at times, but guess what? Like, the amount of respect that your wife and your daughter will have because you're willing to have those conversations and take ownership in it and be accountable for it is all that we can do to then move forward. So you're so right on that front. And I remember Emily, she would say to me, and I was out of the army at the time. It was when I was in the FBI, but she would look at me and she'd be holding both our kids and she'd be like, Chad, like, we're your Ranger team. Like, when are you going to start treating us as your Ranger team? And like, looking, I mean, dude, like, that makes me tear up just saying that right now, because how true is that? Like, I was still so focused on, either me or being self-centered or focused on even the work I was doing in the FBI. But she's like, dude, we're your fire team. we're your Ranger fire team. When are you going to put us first? And I think that's what I heard when you shared that same thing, and how many of us get into that, and we need some type of, actually, unfortunately, a big charisma. I needed a big personal IED in my life to blow me up in order to recognize that and make it God-centered, so that then it could be family focused first and foremost after him.
Yep, 100%. And yeah, I think that one of the things, two of the things that we deal with all the stresses that we get over the prolonged exposure to the war is, one, just our own mental health, but two, our focus, because we alter our focus so we can come home alive.
Mm-hmm.
And at least that's what we tell ourselves. We alter our focus so we can come home alive, but when we come home, we're not living.
Mm-hmm.
And because, you know, we're, I mean, if you did it for your family, because that was my number one drive when I had to dig deep in those times when, you know, those nights were really hard. And the one thing that I would rely back on for personal strength is my family, my wife and my daughter, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
they would help you go that extra mile.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think we got to also recognize that because of the experience that you had, I mean, you said 5 years, 3 months in combat. We also have to recognize, and I think this is more, which is, it's getting better. It's out there. It's there, but guys need to hear it more and more, guys and gals who have had those experiences. Like, there is the physiological change of the brain as well, the chemical, because of the experiences in those heightened states of critical events, that where the chemicals dump in the brain, and it changes the biology of the brain, or the physiological dynamic of the brain. So recognizing that too, and educating ourselves there so that we understand when we come back. Because I love what you said, because it's true for me, at least, when you said, you know, guys come back and they're not really living. And it's being in a distant land, on a distant field, in a distant firefight, and not being present where we are, where our feet are at that point in time. And I think it is very easy to get in that trance. It's almost like a trance, if you will, and to kick ourselves out of that. One of those ways, the most important way, is choosing Christ, to live on him. But then everything that he's done, every person that he's created, can be there to be an added benefit, whether that's mental health, whether that's physical health, whether that's emotional health, whatever those different areas of holistic living, to get us to live presently. But I think on this, you know, and that's why I did it, is I think the Christ-centeredness is, you know, off on the wayside. It's not nearly talked about as much as mental health, emotional health, going and doing all those things. And I think it's a balance of all of those to make us as whole as possible, so we're living presently, here and now. So I love that you said that, because I think you're right on that front about not being present once we're back.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things that, you know, looking back, I'm just like, well, you know, I come home and, yeah, I wasn't never there. I mean, not also was I gone when I was gone, but I was gone when I was here. And
Yeah.
it, you know, there's so much of that just, and I sought the help, uh, through the counseling. As a matter of fact, when I went to the VA, and it really upset me. I went to the VA and I was like, hey, I need to talk to someone. And the very first thing that they did is like, oh, I'll write you a script and I'll send you home. I was like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. I was
Yeah.
like, I want to talk about it. I don't just want a pill.
Yeah.
I want to talk about it. And she's like, oh, and she had to like go ask somebody for, I mean, she was ready to write me a script right then and there, but she had to go ask somebody to, like, you know, because what is that pill going to do? It's
Yeah.
it's really going to just numb my senses. It's not going to change my
Right.
perception, my thought paths, my thought patterns. But, you know, just taking a pill and just sitting there, it's not going to do anything. I wanted to talk to somebody. And And when I was talking to somebody, you know, it was great. It helped out. It gave me some tools, but there was still something missing. And it wasn't until I fully committed to God and started like trying to walk with Jesus, and then eventually started walking with him, and just
Mm-hmm.
like God, I can't do this. I need you. Um, I can't do this. Like I'm broken. And I think that it wasn't until that point in time that I truly felt complete in doing. And I'm not perfect, but like that's the first time, like since the war kicked off, since I was sitting in Hohenfels, Germany, when the planes hit the towers, um, until till like even a couple years after I got out, that I felt a calming peace.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until that moment that I was like, God, I'm going to live for you. I'm going to do what you want me to do. And at that moment, it was like a washing peace. And it's hard to explain, but I know that you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think it's very important for guys to not just seek the mental health, but to also seek God as well.
Amen. Amen to that, dude, because it's indescribable and it's also undeniable. And it's, I think it's, once that Holy Spirit washes over us and we have that inner peace, and not like you said, man, I wish I had it every moment of every day. I wish I could live with it. That's not the case. At least maybe there are some out there, but it's not any that I've ever met. It's certainly not for me, but there are those moments still when his peace washes over, and that calmness, that calming state, that's just like, that he's real and that he's got you. And those are the moments, Gabe. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, being real, transparent and real. And I want you to know, Gabe, that this is going to help somebody out there. It's going to help somebody who's not as far along, who's a couple further paths, in their journey, in their walk, but they're scratching their head and they're wanting, and they're like, man, there's something awry. I need it. And it's going to be your interview here that helps that individual out there. So thank you for coming on, man. I love you and appreciate having you on.
No problem, Chad. Thank you for having me on. God bless.
Yep. I'll see you. All right, folks. Hey, that is episode 16 of Gabe Huft. I was excited to have Gabe on, obviously, because we have a history together in 2nd Ranger Battalion. But then just knowing that his journey and his walk with Christ has been, a little bit more recent. It hasn't been for his entire life. And it's been since he's gotten out of the Army, and some of the questions, then some of the things that were going on once he did retire out of the Army. And just to see where he is now and what the Lord's doing in his life, it's unbelievable. And it just was really sweet to hear the authenticity of his story, and just how I hope it resonates with other guys and gals out there who are able to listen into this episode. So until next time, continue to fight the good fight, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.